This is level 1 of the CFA program, the topic on ethics and professional standards, and the fourth recording on this very long reading, guidance for standards 1 through 7 and ethics applications. Once again, I'll remind you that the LOSs for this standard are identical to all the other standards. Here we are, standard 4, duties to employers. Notice that the Institute has 3 components here, starting with loyalty. And according to the practice handbook, and according to any kind of reasonable definition of loyalty, this is fairly obvious here. So what must members and candidates do? Must act for the benefit of their employer, not deprive their employer of any advantage. And notice what we have in bolded there, otherwise cause harm to their employer. That sounds an awful lot like loyalty to me. Key points here: members must not engage in conduct that harms the interests of employers. And the interesting part of this reading is this section on confidential information. So members and CFA candidates, of course, must not divulge confidential information, and that confidential information applies to information related to the employer, related to colleagues, of course, and then probably most obvious, related to clients. Key areas here: employer responsibilities, positive working environment. And this goes back to what I said to you in this first recording inside this topic, but it also goes back to our discussion of the responsibilities of not only just the board of directors of a publicly held corporation, but any board. I always give the example of the chief risk officer, and it's his or her responsibility to maintain an environment in which all silos, all employees think about risk. And the same is true for ethics here. Positive working environment. Now, of course, what that means is that it's a lot easier to have a positive working environment if the compensation packages for all the employees are fair and reasonable and, of course, competitive. And so what that does is that eliminates the incentives for individuals to pursue some type of unethical decision-making framework. Now, a lot of times in the industry, we have this concept of an independent practice. So independent competitive activity is probably going to be available to many of us, and that should probably not conflict with the interests of the employer. If you're going to engage in this kind of activity, what should we do? We should probably just disclose it. Yeah, I think the CFA Institute likes to test this topic about what you're doing when you leave an employer. And so you need to make certain that we're loyal to the current employer until that resignation is effective. But then it doesn't end right there. Of course, you're not allowed to misappropriate trade secrets. You're not allowed to use that confidential information. You're not allowed to solicit clients while still on the job. But what that sounds an awful lot like is that the Institute wants to do like a, what do they call that in the science fiction movies? They want to kind of do like an erasing of the brain. And I'm pretty sure that the Institute is not pursuing that kind of a policy. Of course, there are things that you are going to remember. Names of former clients, skill sets that you have learned, but you need to be careful about misappropriation. And we've talked about social media and a couple other recordings, so let's make sure that loyalty applies to any kind of a social media presence. This guidance right here, I think, is a pretty good one. Make sure that you have your own personal social media page, and then you have your professional media page, and all of the activities that line up in those. Whistleblowing, of course, this is not only permitted, but it's probably allowed and probably encouraged. But Of course, if there's something unethical going on, then of course everybody needs to know about it, not least of which is the government, but only if it protects the client's interests or the integrity of capital markets. And so what that precludes is some kind of a biased attitude towards a colleague or the firm in general. My mother used to always say to me when I was a little guy, when she would say no to whatever I was asking, and she would say something like, Jimmy, pouting is no good. And so when I think about this, I always think about, hey, let's make sure that of course we're going to be disappointed. Let's not pout. Let's not take it out on anyone else. When you read a question stem, make sure that you read whether or not it's an employee or an independent contractor. Now, how do we comply with with this standard here? So when we go to work for an employer, we need to know their policy on competition, on termination, how to report incidences, and then what kind of classes there are between and among different kinds of employees. Let's go ahead and sum up this standard on loyalty. Take a look at an example question here. 1 month resignation notice. He has taken the contacts of his employer's clients, which he had brought with him. He intends to market his new employer's investment products to these clients once he starts a new job. Let's see, what has happened? And I've said this to you before. A lot of these questions are going to be, no, there was not a violation, or yes, there was a violation because of this, or no, there was a violation because of that. And so this one ought to be an obvious one. This is an easy one. Of course, this is a violation of the code and the standards, taking property without permission. How about additional compensation arrangements? And we did mention in a previous recording about gifts and going on trips. I think I might have mentioned somebody going on to a professional baseball game. Maybe it was even an Olympic event. So of course you can accept gifts. However, let's make sure that it doesn't. What was that other standard that we were talking about? Make sure that those gifts don't bias us against or in favor of our research report. Now here, it's very similar, but what we're doing is we're worried about a conflict of interest, okay? And so make sure that when you accept gifts, benefits, compensation, or consideration that is in either direct or indirect competition, that you get written consent. And that's why we put that in bolded there at the bottom. Yeah, we need to make sure we worry about other benefits received from third parties in addition to anything that might be compensation or benefits to cover direct compensation, maybe reimbursements. Boy, that second eyeglass point sounds an awful lot like some great philosophy statement here. Money corrupts, but it is not always bad. Of course, written consent and any form of communication can be documented. Remember in one of those previous videos, we talked about how important it is. It was in that mosaic theory, and we said something like, the Institute is perfectly happy for us to do lots and lots of due diligence, but go ahead and make sure that you document back for the mosaic theory research, but also let's go ahead and get this documentation, and let's get written consent. Yeah, how do we comply with these additional compensation arrangements? Of course, just immediately write to your supervisor and then make sure that you put as many details in the report as you can and get some extra information from the party offering the additional compensation. Notice what we have there, that last bullet point, again, disclosure, there's an exclamation point. Those of you who watch Seinfeld, feel free to chuckle over the exclamation point. All right, how about a quick example question here? This will take a couple of slides. So we issue a report with a buy recommendation on a real estate company. So the CEO of this company invites the analyst to tour the company's headquarters, during which they will discuss the real estate industry in detail. Real estate industry in detail. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable to me, right? Doesn't sound like there's going to be any violation of this standard. Private yacht. Oh my gosh. So there we go. Bells and whistles ringing off in our head. Private yacht to bring her from her coastal town to the headquarters. So before I hit the next button here on the slide, let's figure out how can we get on the private yacht and not violate this particular standard. And the answer is probably just to pay for the private yacht transportation, which of course is probably not, you probably have a difficult time coming up with some kind of a market price for riding on a private yacht. So that when you read private yacht or private helicopter, you should automatically have an exclamation point like Elaine did on Seinfeld going off in your brain. All right, accepts the meeting but declines the offer travel arrangements. All right, that sounds super reasonable, right? Let's see. The analyst then joins the CEO for luncheon at a 5-star hotel next to the headquarters. Well, I mean, we have to eat, right? So 5-star hotel, does it matter if it's a 5-star hotel or a 1-star hotel? I'm not sure about that. Let's see. Provides, upon returning, full review of the meeting, except the details of the luncheon attended. Has the analyst violated the code of standards? So what do you think about this? Clearly, the accepting of the meeting is okay. The declining of the private yacht, that's a good thing. The lunch at the 5-star hotel is probably okay, but why would we fail to report that? So yeah, took the right actions by declining, notifying the compliance officer. That's right. However, they should have notified the employer of the luncheon upon her return. Now remember, we said this in an earlier recording that, in an ideal world, we would always get pre-approval. But of course, how can you get pre-approval if all of a sudden you're at the meeting and then all of a sudden you're walking and then there's the 5-star hotel and there's the restaurant? It doesn't make any sense. It's not really convenient to get pre-approval. So make sure that you disclose this after the event. How about responsibility of supervisors? And so you think about all of the responsibilities of supervisors that relate to things like quality of research reports, skill set of all the analysts, knowledge and understanding of derivative security. So put all that aside and let's add another one here under the standard and say something like, as a supervisor, if you have 10 individuals working for you, then you need to do everything within reason to make certain that those 10 individuals, that they know the law, that they're aware of the laws, that they comply with the laws, and that if they don't know anything about the laws, that they go to our compliance officer or the compliance department. So what do we have in bolded there? Subject to their supervision or authority complies with applicable laws, rules, regulations, and of course the code. Key points, responsibility to guide employee conduct. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier in the recording, that if we have this culture, if we have an ethical culture, if we're always talking between and among each other that's saying something like, did you hear what happened over here? Did you hear what happened over here? Let's talk about this and let's make ethics a part of our regular kinds of conversation. So reasonable supervision. Of course, this doesn't mean hovering and oppressing. It doesn't mean standing over everyone's shoulder every time there's a decision to be made, because of course nobody's going to enjoy working for that kind of a supervisor. How to comply, let the rules be clear. That makes sense. So compliance officer, we talked about this many, many times. Procedures and updates, education, this is super important. Review employee actions. I like this. I've said this to you before in previous recordings, that as a college professor, what I love to do is, I love getting up in front of the classroom and teaching. And then at the end, towards the end of every semester, the students are asked to give their observations and their evaluations for, essentially my performance during the semester. And I always give them, and they do this, away from me, so I can't see, and it's all anonymous, but I always give them specific questions to answer in addition to kind of the standard stuff that our college distributes. And I will say something like, hey, we talked about currency swaps this semester, and we did this and this and this. And remember that problem we did on currency swap? I would love your opinion on how valuable that was to you just as a general finance major, how valuable it was to you in your search for a job, and how valuable it was for you in terms of adding to your breadth and depth of knowledge. All right, how about an exam question here? Here we have an analyst, head of the research department, decided to change her recommendation of a certain pharmaceutical products company from a sell to a buy. All right, so orally discusses with the heads of the department new propositions before the research report is published. Let's see. One of the heads of the department buys pharmaceutical shares for his own account and those of his high net worth clients. Oh boy. Some heads of the department spread the word of some of these customers. Oh boy. So Lois most likely violated, did not violate. We have some reasons about did not violate, but what are you thinking here? The solution is that she most likely violated the CFA Institute Code and standards, probably because she failed to reasonably and sufficiently supervise the actions of those under her. And then those procedures were probably not reasonable, and especially because, let me go back here, was that dude's name Jason Hole? Of course, he did this on his own, and he did it for some of his high net worth clients. So that probably was a violation of some procedural. So that takes us through standard 4, duties to employers. So this is what I want you to do. I say this at the end of every one of these recordings here in these 7s. I want you to go to those 30 some questions at the end of this reading. And now we're up to 4/7, so you're going to go through this the 4th time, and I'm guessing that you're getting all the ones correct that you may or may not have gotten wrong earlier, and we'll work our way up through the next 3 standards. So thank you for watching, and have a great day.